Hello and most welcome to 1767 of the Heidegger series. We will today start with a brand new article by Warren D. Goldfarb. It is a rather sorry, bit squeaky in the throat today. It's a rather famous article. I want you to bring me a slab. Remarks on the opening sections of the philosophical investigations. I want you to bring me a slab. Remarks on the opening sections of the philosophical investigations. The first few pages of the philosophical investigations are often seen as relatively unproblematic. To many, this portion of the text has appeared reasonably clear in intent and operation, and in the end easily digestible. The source of some such complacency is not hard to find. Many of Wittgenstein's remarks throughout his treatment of language and meaning seem to be directed against a naive mentalism, a view to the effect that meaning and allied notions are grounded in or constituted by a current mental phenomena, perhaps even mental images. Wittgenstein constantly urges us to look and see whether there are phenomena of the appropriate sorts going on inside. When we assert a sentence, issue a command, point to a thing, attend to a property, and so on. Wittgenstein's presumed point is that when we find no such phenomena, the case is won. So far, this is easily digestible. But to take Wittgenstein's primary object to be naive mentalism is to take him to be attacking a straw man. It is difficult to find any significant philosopher whose doctrines could be so easily defeated. Indeed, such naive mentalism is most foreign to just those philosophers with whose views on language Wittgenstein is most concerned, versus Frege and the author of Tractatus. After all, the keynote of early analytic philosophy is always to separate the logical from the psychological. Frege and the early Wittgenstein are insistent on the irrelevance of the passing mental show to any questions of meaning. Their order of priority is clear. Only given the structures they see as underlying objective communication can sense be made of psychological notions. Of course, it could be claimed that despite the protestations, the early analytic philosophers were in some straightforward way mentalists in disguise. various commentators led on, I believe, by their complacent construal of the investigation's early sections, have read mentalism back into Frege and the early Wittgenstein. These readings are, to my mind, simply unsupported by the texts. Moreover, they render it impossible to understand what the aims of early analytic philosophy were and how it could have affected the dramatic change it did. My question then is how Wittgenstein's seemingly naive remarks and the passages in which they are embedded could be meant to cut more deeply, that is, to go beyond an attack on some rather unsophisticated theories of meaning. This question has a specifically exegetical form, for it is the question of the nature of Wittgenstein's interlocutor in the opening sections. What stance does he represent, and why does Wittgenstein set up the particular oppositions that he does? The beginnings of an answer can come only from a close scrutiny of how these interactions unfold. In this, moreover, attention has to be paid to the ways Wittgenstein's rejoinders and proposals may be meant to engage and provoke the reader, not merely to elicit acquiescence. To take these questions seriously is to recognize a curious and pervasive feature of Wittgenstein's method. Wittgenstein does not ordinarily set up as his opponent one who expresses anything recognizable as a philosophical theory of naming, meaning, mind, or what have you. The interlocutor does not voice developed philosophical positions. He is not as sophisticated Phrygian or Tractarian, who puts forward some tenet P of his system, to which Wittgenstein counters not P. This feature is sometimes characterized as Wittgenstein's counters, who put forward some tenet P of his system, to which Wittgenstein counters not P. This feature is sometimes characterized as Wittgenstein's interest in unmasking temptations. Talk of temptations has its good points. It indicates that Wittgenstein seeks not so much to propose an alternative to such and such a philosophical theory, but to pull the rug out from under the theory. Moreover, it hints that to be successful, Wittgenstein's remarks might have led one. Wittgenstein's remarks must exact an acknowledgement that what he has pointed out is what might have led one on. Obtaining such an acknowledgement may require portraying the sources of a philosophical position rather than refuting the position. It may well be more a matter of depiction than of argument. Unmasking temptations, however, is a slogan. Like all Wittgensteinian meta-philosophical slogans, if it is not supported by a detailed account on what is going on in the sections where the work is being done, it can mean anything. Indeed, the slogan can mislead in suggesting that there are specific theses which play the role of unnoticed premises, which are beguiling but which can be recognized as incorrect or misguided as soon as they are made explicit. Rather, what Wittgenstein wishes to bring to light operates at a more basic level. For in these sections, Wittgenstein is examining what it is to begin looking for a philosophical account of language and meaning. The decisive moves in the conjuring trick do not amount to specific theses held by this or that philosopher. No, they are made without noticing, without notice, at the point in the course of philosophizing, far earlier than the development of a particular position. Thus I see the opening of investigations as crucially concerned with exhibiting such an early stage and with evoking its character. All this is still not far beyond the level of slogans. There's no way of fleshing it out but to scrutinize Wittgenstein's words. Hence, it is to the text that I now turn. Wittgenstein begins, as is well known, with a passage from Augustine's Confessions. And tells us that the passage expresses a particular conception of the essence of language. The conception he elaborates has three features: Every word names something. The meaning of a word is what it names. There is no difference between kinds of words. Surely we ought to object to this as a starting point. It is hard to see that anyone of importance has ever held this position. And again, the conception seems most inaccurate if attributed to the early analytic philosophers I've mentioned. To say of Frege that he does not recognize differences in kinds of words is to ignore the centrality to his thought of his distinction between saturated and unsaturated expressions. To say that Frege takes the meaning of a word to be what names is to misread him blindly. For Frege gives Bedeutung a special usage and emphasizes the role in what we unreflectively call the meaning of a word, both Bedeutung and Sinn. Moreover, to attribute this conception to the early Wittgenstein is to miss what he himself calls his Grundgedanke, that the logical constants do not stand for anything. Now it might be said that although this so-called Augustinian conception is not particularly true to these or other modern thinkers. These thinkers share enough of the conception that their differences with it are mere matters of detail. That is to say that the actual theories of language are not what is at issue. I think, in fact, that Wittgenstein is suggesting this. But it surely does not do to use the label Augustinian conception at will. And then take any considerations against its crude features as directly refuting or undermining the philosophers so labeled. The task is to figure out on what level Wittgenstein might be operating that would make details unimportant, and what there is about a crude conception like this that carries over to sophisticated theorizing. I believe, however, that in paragraph 1, Wittgenstein is also raising a deeper problem. It is not at all obvious that Augustine is expressing a conception of the essence of language. my primary reaction to the citation from the Confessions read by itself is to think that what it expresses is obvious. It seems trivial, prosaic, well nigh unobjectionable. It is just a harmless elaboration of the observations that early in life children learn what things are called and learn to express their wants and needs verbally. It hardly goes beyond the level of the commonplace. Surely no capital can be made of it. Thus, I would like to take Wittgenstein's first sentence after the quotation to the effect that Augustine's remarks contain a definite picture of the essence of language to be intended to shock. Many commentators would have us meekly acquiesce to this sentence, whereas I suggest that Wittgenstein means to call up amazement. This is giving the essence of language. This is a philosophical conception of meaning. In short, Wittgenstein is already in paragraph 1, pointing to the unclarity of what it is to have a conception of language. We know neither what constitutes a conception nor when it happens that our words express one. he is suggesting that despite its commonplace air, the quotation can be taken as expressing a way of looking at language that is in its very core philosophical. The transformation of Augustine's remarks from trivial to metaphysical occurs when we read the passage as attempting to treat certain sorts of problems as being entered in certain sorts of debates. The notions Augustine invokes, like naming some object, wishing to point a thing out, and state of mind, can be entirely unquestionable. After all, we use them all the time. However, Wittgenstein seeks to show that when these notions are used in certain contexts, they come to have a weight that our ordinary understanding of them does not support. I take Wittgenstein to want to claim that, roughly put, innocent notions like these function in philosophy continually. To set up the frameworks in which the debate goes on. That they are everyday notions fuels our conviction of their availability for philosophical exploitation. But when they figure in general explanatory settings, a structure is imposed on them, so construed that they will shape how we view the task of any account and how we characterize what is to be accounted for. to expose these ordinarily hidden moves. Wittgenstein will adopt what we might call an intentional naivete. The chief expression of this stance is the constant hectoring of the interlocutor to substantiate his remarks and even his terminology, a hectoring that seems often to be challenging to the obvious. Wittgenstein's aim here is to keep us to a low level, the level of description, for we cannot see what our words come to until we have a perspicuous and unbiased view of what the data are. To be sure, it is never clear beforehand what description is and when we are in danger of going beyond it. In the list of uses of language in paragraph 23, Wittgenstein indicates that description is not a single or homogeneous category. And of course, we cannot take description to amount to something like picking out facts, where the notion of fact is supposed to have some independent content. However, the point here goes further. Whether a sentence counts as a description will depend on the work to which it is to be put. The forced naivete is thus meant to unearth how things we say, things that in ordinary contexts are the most ordinary sorts of descriptions, can become something else, Wittgenstein begins to flesh out these ideas at once. In paragraph 2, he gives a simple example where all is open to view. The language of the builders. He says it is a language for which the description given by Augustine is correct. It is a language, I take it, where there can be no question of what it amounts to make ascriptions. Augustine does. In paragraph 5, Wittgenstein notes, it disperses the fog to study the phenomena of language in primitive kinds of application in which one can command a clear view of the aim and functioning of the words. A little pause there. So let's see here. The remark ought not to be taken flatly. To be sure, Wittgenstein adduces the example of paragraph 2 because he hopes it to be illuminating. Yet, I cannot imagine that he intends us to accept the example without hesitation. For surely it raises serious questions which are perhaps best brought out by considering two ways in which the example may be taken. We can imagine the builders as people much like you and me, but having 4 special sounds that they use in a specific way. That is the way given in paragraph 2. There seems to me little problem in this. We can then easily think of an apprentice's learning this language by watching, grasping the intention in the utterances, seeing what builder A wants, etc. And there can be no hesitation in saying of A that he wants a slab and therefore calls out slab, So here we see that Augustine is correct, literally word for word. 2. On the other hand, we can imagine the builders as people whose entire linguistic behavior is given by the description in paragraph 2. Now the terrain has changed and perhaps is evidenced by our imaginings. Now it seems most natural then to think that these builders are cavemen, as plodding, as having blank expressions, and so on. Here a worry arises. Perhaps the terrain has changed too much. Surely it can be objected that under reading 2, the example has no relevance to the study of phenomena of language, because it is then hardly a language at all. If this is the whole of the language, can we take them to be speaking, to be using words with understanding, to be human? In fact, I take Wittgenstein to be asking for this reaction. This is evidenced by his use of calls for the words of his language, by the interlocutory accusation in paragraph 65 that Wittgenstein evades the real problem by not giving a characterization of what counts as a language. And by paragraphs 19 and 20, as we shall presently see. Moreover, outside the investigations, he alludes to the builders several times. That is, remarks on the foundations of mathematics, paragraph 50, and settle, paragraph 999. All these shows a fascination with the builders and suggests that it is an example meant to be spun out. The challenge is that under reading 2, what is described is not a language. Now, what are the grounds for this challenge? That is for denying that there can be understanding here. Denying this, so to speak, at the very start, so as to deny the relevance of anything further that might be said about paragraph 2. What, after all, is wrong with taking the assistant who starts getting it right, bringing a slab upon hearing slab as understanding? There are, of course, stories that seem to support the challenge. These imagined builders do seem mechanical and animal-like. Yet this hardly seems more than to say that these builders are not fully intelligible to us, or that we cannot imagine ourselves leading their lives. Wittgenstein would then ask why one should dig into one's heels on such ground. That is, Wittgenstein would insistently demand reasons for vesting anything important in one or another particular part of any story that could be told here. In the face of this insistence, the challenger might well want to explode with this: these builders do not think. They cannot think. What Wittgenstein has described leaves no room for thinking. Indeed, such a reaction is suggested in Settle paragraph 99, where the interlocutor says, "You are just tacitly assuming that these people think that they are like people as we know them in that respect." Now, if what pulls together and underlines the force of challenge does lie in the idea of thought, then it should be clear that the challenge cannot operate at the level of description, for it implicitly invokes an unexamined conception of great intricacy and power. To mount such a challenge is, in the end, to imagine an independent process of thinking that is behind and animate language. It is to imagine language as stuck onto people who already have thoughts. Thoughts are what makes noises into language. Now Wittgenstein does not engage in a full-tilt assault on philosophical conceptions of thinking until later in the investigations. For now, it is enough to emphasize the wealth of assumptions made when thinking is exploited in the present context. In Settle paragraph 99, Wittgenstein goes on to say of the builders, but the important thing is that the language and the thinking too may be rudimentary, that there is such a thing as primitive thinking, which is to be described via primitive behavior. In simply presenting the possibility of taking the builders to have rudimentary thought, the sort of thought appropriate to their lives, Wittgenstein means to undermine the sharp dichotomy. Either they are just people as we know them, or else they are automata. More important, though, he is posing two general questions. From what stance are standards for what counts as thinking supposed to come? Upon what features is the power we are ascribing to thought supposed to be based? These questions have particular force, I think, against those who hold whatever handle we can get on the notion of thought comes only via considerations about language. For Wittgenstein is suggesting that they may well have stacked the deck implicitly, or even subliminally, using a conception of thought to frame the characterization of what it is to be analyzed, and in thereby coloring the data that have to be accounted for. There are, of course, ways to respond to Wittgenstein's questions. The morale, however, is that one cannot buy the whole kit and caboodle at the start. We must examine in the small what aspects of our operations we are taking as crucial to animate language and why. This is in some measure the subject of paragraph 19. Hence, nothing conclusive emerges from the worries about the builders. Again, I take this to be intentional. The absence of a definite answer is also hinted at in paragraph 360. We say only of a human being and of what is like one that it thinks. The hint comes from the obviously intentional vagueness of like. We are then meant to retain a certain uneasiness, a sense of oddity about reading. 2. Of the builder's language. In denying the builders anything else but these calls, we have denied them so much that we are reluctant to call them names. To say that here Slab names Slab is just to say that A calls out Slab and B brings a slab. All is open to view. Because of this simplicity, we want to say that this is perhaps like a name, but really it is not one, or not one in the real sense, the sense in which we have names in our language, stripped of the ideology that leads to the blunt assertion, this is not language. The reluctance itself is a datum. This reluctance reflects back on what I said about paragraph 1. As we've seen under reading 1, there is no question about the word-for-word accuracy of Augustine's remarks. Upon reading 2, however, we are uneasy and hesitate to apply the notion of naming some object, as well as, presumably, those of wishing to point a thing out, state of mind, and the like. What creates the reluctance, the difference between the two readings, is the abrogation of the rest of the language. This suggests that our everyday applications of these notions presuppose the surroundings provided by the rest of language. Given that the surroundings are in place, we can use these notions without reservation to mark out various distinctions. When the surroundings are removed, the notions no longer operate quite rightly. And there we end this reading of Warren Goldfarb's I Want You to Bring Me a Slab. Why, thank you very much and have a very pleasant morning, day, or afternoon wherever you are. Bye bye for now.